All right. So obviously, big news in the world of college football this week. College football playoff selection committee has made their decisions. They've got the top four. Number one, Michigan. Number two, Washington. Number three, Texas. Number four, Alabama. And in this being the last year of the 14 college football playoff, probably the wildest selection we've seen since the playoff was introduced. And that's that way for a couple reasons. Because of the conference championships last weekend, we saw Alabama versus Georgia, Georgia losing in an upset. So the number one team that had previously won like 29 games in a row, they get knocked out of the playoff entirely. Then you have Alabama as an 8 seed coming in because of that win. And then because of that, and because Texas had already beaten Alabama and was otherwise 12-1, if Alabama gets in, they get in. And who that leaves out is undefeated 13-0 Florida State. Now, I know, Simon, you aren't the biggest college football fan, but even just on principle, how do you feel about a team that was in the top four the entire year, despite not losing a game, being left out of the college football playoff?
Well, I mean, it's just wild. Like, I don't understand how you can leave out an undefeated team. It's just, I think that all the outrage that has come from it. I think there was talks of a lawsuit coming out of this. I think it's all very warranted because I mean, what else could you have done if you're Florida State? I think that's the biggest conversation. You did every single thing right just to get screwed. Like that's just
so like
there's nothing that you can do about that.
The tricky thing is there is the reason they're left out is, and I've seen a lot of this debate on Twitter. Is it the most deserving five teams that will get in, or is it the top four teams that will get in? And obviously, the big asterisk around Florida State and their 13-0 record is that their Heisman candidate quarterback, Jordan Travis, broke his leg and will not be playing. And I believe even their backup got a concussion, and they were in the what conference are they? ACC? In the ACC championship. They were playing with their third string quarterback. And you have to ask, without their starting quarterback, can they compete against the top three teams in college football? But do you think, Simon, even taking that quarterback injury into account, does that change your opinion on it all, or does it still feel not fair to the rest of the Florida State team that they got left out?
That is the tough thing, right? Where it's you really have to. You're right. You have to think about, can they compete against the best of the best without their best quarterback? And even Travis Hunter was saying that with him. I think he came out saying basically that he wishes he broke his leg sooner so that the whole world would see how good they are without him, right? Because I mean, the entire thing is just incredibly unfortunate for everyone involved. Truthfully, probably not. They wouldn't have been able to compete without their best quarterback. That's just how it is. Like the quarterback position is so vital to a team, and when you lose that, that is usually what. Not everybody is I think it was 2019 Philly Eagles. Like, that's not going to happen, or 2018, whatever year it was. Like, not every team is going to be able to win with. Oh, I'm off by a country mile. Holy crap. Oh, Jesus. Whatever. You know what I mean. Like,
time flies.
Time flies, exactly. Doesn't feel that long ago. But, anyway, like, not everybody's going to be able to win with their backup. Of course, if you are Florida State, you have to. It just sucks. Like, there's nothing around it. So I kind of get both sides of the argument, I think, is where I'm kind of landing on this, because they deserve it. They won the 2 games without their starter. They still won. You can't take that away from them. But would they necessarily beat, who would they have played again? I don't remember.
They would have played Michigan, because they would have gotten in as number 4.
Do you think that they would have beat Michigan without Travis Hunter?
Oh, absolutely not. Without Jordan Travis? Yeah, absolutely
Jordan.
not.
Oh, wait, I'm saying the wrong name.
Travis Hunter.
God, I'm not off to a good start. College football fans are going to hate me. Holy crap.
Yeah, no, like it's a tough thing to say, because no, they definitely wouldn't have beaten Michigan. And I think if you're the CFP committee, you're looking at it from the angle of, like, you just watched the worst national championship game in history when Georgia comes out and beats TCU 65-7. And now TCU, to their credit, did beat Michigan. Like, they deserve to be in the playoffs. But I feel like that still kind of stings, and you don't want to see that kind of a game again. because there's such a big difference between a Michigan Alabama matchup and a Michigan Florida State matchup, especially without Jordan Travis. But again, Florida State literally couldn't have done anything different other than Jordan Travis not breaking his leg. So that's where it kind of is like, ooh. And that's why it's such a good thing that we're moving to an expanded playoff. I've never understood why college football limits the amount of teams in the playoff. I never understood it when it was 1v2 and that was the only game that was played. I was happy that they expanded to a 4-team playoff, but I never understood why they didn't do more. So it sucks that this didn't come a year earlier, because I think there's plenty of deserving candidates. Because again, not only Florida State getting left out, but Georgia, who went undefeated the entire regular season and barely lost in the SEC championship. And then there's one more team that got left out that could have potentially gotten in. It's splitting my mind now. But what are your opinions on the structure of how it works right now, Simon, in terms of the 4-team playoff?
Well, once again, as somebody who's definitely more of an outsider on college football, I think it's just weird. Like, even just, it just doesn't make sense to me why this would exist. Like, why would you let the most important playoffs in your sport or in your league or what have you, why would you let that be dictated by something that isn't necessarily on the field? Like, it's bringing some, like, political almost, like, because you're pointing out the fact that, like, an Alabama and Michigan matchup is just bigger than Jesus, I'm tripping, Michigan and Florida State matching up. I mean, no shit, right? Like, that doesn't feel like that even needs to be said. But that doesn't mean that you should just be eliminating Florida State just because it's not as cool. Like, that almost takes like the entire point of the regular season out of it, right? Like, if you're just gonna you're just gonna pick Alabama no matter what, what's the point in any other team trying, right? It's kind of that's the other side of things that's why I almost lean towards the other side of things, where it's like, sure, like, that matchup might have been bad, and me and you can sit here on our high chairs on this podcast and say Michigan would have destroyed Florida State. But what if Florida State won, right? What if, with like their
Michigan got beat by TCU?
Imagine how big of a story that would have been, though. Like, in the playoffs, people were talking about taking Florida State out. They went out there and proved everybody wrong. And we're never going to be able to see that because they chose to put in a team with a worse record. Like, that's just dumb. Like, you shouldn't you shouldn't be letting that dictate things.
Yeah. And I think in terms of, because I completely agree. And I think I agree with that sentiment, but I also do think they made the right decision, if that makes sense. Because it's impossible to make that decision. I don't think, if you're going to choose the 4 best teams in college football, even though Florida State was undefeated, I think Alabama beating Georgia is just so huge and means a lot more. But I also think you shouldn't have to have that situation. Ohio State was the other one that got left out. Ohio State went 12-1, and the only loss they had is to Michigan, who is the number 1 team in the country. Like, how do you kind of judge that?
Yeah,
it's so tough when you're leaving.
You almost lose. You're leaving those 3 teams.
Yeah, because it's like Ohio State and Michigan have to play every year, so that game between them is basically a playoff game. Because whoever loses that game, it's part of the reason it's so big. Whoever loses that game, you're not making the playoffs. I'm really excited for this 12-team bracket coming into play, because for me, I've just started getting into college football a lot more, watching, especially because I didn't really have a team, and I kind of latched onto Washington. Go Dogs. I've latched onto them, especially, obviously being a fan of the Seahawks in the Seattle area. Got to see a game, Washington, Utah. They're super exciting right now. Michael Penix, Rome Odunze, they've got so many guys who are going to be NFL stars. So I've just started getting into it, and it's just so disappointing to see when some of these matchups could have been a lot better, and they just ultimately weren't. I'm still going to be excited for Washington versus Texas. I'm still going to watch it, but if this was a 12-team bracket, and I believe there would just be so many more exciting matchups, like Ohio State versus Penn State would have been a matchup. It's almost like
you're just leaving money on the table, is how I describe it, because it's playoffs. Yeah. Why would you limit that? Like, that's when you're making the most money, right? Like, I mean, I could be wrong. Maybe there's like something more to the fact that you'd make even more with only four, or I guess that'd be two games.
Who
Or
knows?
one second, Simon needs to take another math class apparently. But
I
like,
mean, there's some people argue it's like, oh well, like you're then the argument's just going to move to who's the 12th team that gets in. But I feel like that's a little bit
no, I don't think so.
stupid and kind
That's
of
not
far
as big
fetched. I
because
don't
like
think
what
so.
you go that far down the totem pole, do you really think it's gonna be that bit as big of a deal as this is?
No, it's not.
Because you're
going
going to be leaving
It's
on a
like,
team
oh wow,
that's probably going to be like what? What do you think the record of the 12th team right now is? If you were to,
they're
if you were to check.
probably like, if I were to guess, I'd say they'd have 2 or 3 losses.
Well, there you go. Do you think
Um,
that's going to be as controversial? At least that team
No.
can sit here and go, well, we lost 3 games this season. Maybe that's why we weren't kept in. If we won that one game, and that's the funny thing with this entire situation, we have a team that went undefeated, and they now have to sit here and go, well, Bama.
Yeah, yeah, and it's like I do think it's interesting because with this 12-team playoff, there are still some issues with it. I think what's great about it is those you got the Power Five conferences. Every single champion of a conference immediately gets a spot. So Florida State would get
That's
in
a
no
lot
matter
better.
what.
Yeah.
And I think that's great because then it's actually like playing games to decide who gets into the playoffs. The one thing that kind of stinks is it's good because there's I believe I don't know exactly how it works because you've got the Power Five conferences and then you've got some lesser, more minor conferences, and they give the highest ranked team from there a spot, I believe, which is cool, but also like if that happened today, they'd be putting Liberty against Florida State instead of Oklahoma, which feels like a blowout in the making. So there's some kinks to
Yeah.
work out in it. Yeah,
I guess that is the
it's
one
definitely
conversation, right? Where it's like you can't exactly do 1 versus 12 in college football. 'Cause
Yeah.
it's just like, I mean, obviously, what didn't you say? Michigan was #1. Like, I guess that'd just be kind
Yeah.
of like,
Yeah, so the structure of it would be Florida State it would be 5v12 and then 1 through 4 would get a bye would be the how it would work. So
Okay.
there'd be
Well, that's
8 versus
cool.
9. That's
Yeah,
not bad. So
I could get behind
if it were to happen today, yeah, if it were to happen today, it would be number 8 Oregon, number 9 Missouri, and then number 5 Florida State versus number 12 Liberty, number 6 Georgia versus number 11 Ole Miss, number 7 Ohio State versus number 10 Penn State.
like
Which
that
I think
sounds pretty
would be fascinating. And then even after that round, you get some more intriguing matchups. So then, like, let's say Oregon wins, it would be Oregon, Michigan, fascinating matchup. Like Florida State, Alabama, amazing. Georgia v Texas, amazing. Ohio State versus Washington, amazing. Like, there's so many. I think, especially at this point in college football, there's so many good teams that should deprive us of these kind of matchups. Like, I think that just kind of sucks all the fun out of the sport. Like, I'm getting into the sport because of like these big matchups, like Ohio State, Michigan, Washington, Oregon this year. Those are what's fun, and this playoff is hopefully going to facilitate more of that, which is why this year kind of stings.
Yeah, yeah, and I completely agree with you. I think the funny thing is, it almost sounded like you were gonna try and argue against the 12-game playoff or 12-team playoff, sorry, and then you almost talked yourself into it, which I thought was the funny thing.
Yeah, well, there's some flaws in it. There's some flaws in it, but it is infinitely better than what we have now. Like
Yeah,
that's going to be
for
my
sure.
ultimate point. It's not like
Well,
I can't. It's
and
not
when-
like I'm going to come out and say it's perfect.
When you're choosing all the best teams from 5 different like conferences, that's gonna be rough no matter what. Like,
Yeah.
like that's like you're gonna have to leave out a lot of very good football teams, and that's the issue. You're like, and again, this is coming back to what you said that some people are complaining about is you're just moving it down from 4 to 12 to what people are going to complain about. But like I said, I still think that's better because at least that 12th team
It's a
can
lot better.
sit there on the merit of like, well, we lost 3 games to people maybe we shouldn't have lost to. That's why we're not here.
Yeah. Yeah, and that feels so much more fair than what they're doing there, because at least you have a shot to play for something. At least you have a shot to play for something. And even if you don't, yeah, exactly. Like you said, you can point to a game in your season where you didn't stack up. And there's a reason why you're not in. For Florida State, the reason they're not in right now is because their quarterback broke his leg. That's not fair.
Yeah, you shouldn't be falling out because of injuries, like sure, and I'm not talking about injuries like causing losses. I'm talking about just they don't have a loss, right? And
Yeah.
that's just ridiculous. Like it's like I on the merit of it, I agree with you. Like on the idea on what you said a couple of minutes ago on the whole thing of at the end of the day, they probably made the right decision on what would be the most competitive playoffs. But it's just like you have to feel bad for everybody involved, right? Like because it's
Yeah.
just like what do you even do? Like they're
Yeah. Because you can't do anything other than just like sit there and feel bad because you didn't get the chance.
yeah.